It was a flight that was supposed to be like any other. The cabin was filled with passengers from all walks of life, each of them lost in their own world, whether it was scrolling through their phones, reading a book, or staring out the window. Among them was Karoline Leavitt, a young and rising political star, heading back to Washington after a brief trip to her home state. Karoline was known for her bold stances and her knack for speaking her mind. She had made a name for herself in the world of politics, often appearing on news channels, giving interviews, and making waves on social media. Yet, in the quiet of the airplane cabin, Karoline was just another passenger, at least for the time being. Her first-class seat was spacious and comfortable, a luxury that many travelers dream of but few get to experience. As the plane took off, she sank into the plush seat, feeling the familiar hum of the engines and the gentle rhythm of the aircraft in the sky. It was supposed to be a moment of relaxation, a brief escape from the busy world she inhabited. But as the flight continued, something caught her eye. She noticed an older man in the coach section of the plane, seated alone. He looked like he had been through a lot. His worn military cap and the faded, creased expression on his face told a story of a life lived with sacrifice. A veteran, Karoline realized, but one who didn't seem to have the luxury of a comfortable seat. Without much thought, Karoline made a decision that would not only change the course of her day but also leave an indelible mark on the people around her. She stood up and walked towards the back of the plane. Her heart raced, but her conviction was clear. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice steady. "I'd like to trade seats with you. You should be in first class." The veteran looked at her in surprise. He was clearly taken aback by her offer. The other passengers around them glanced over, some intrigued, others skeptical. But Karoline was already standing there, waiting for his response. It was a moment of humility, one that would soon become a story told across the nation. What happened next stunned everyone. The veteran, a man in his late 60s, blinked in disbelief. He looked Karoline up and down, as if trying to gauge whether this was some kind of joke or if she was truly sincere. His wrinkled face softened as he let out a long, tired sigh. "Ma'am, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not sure," he started, trailing off. The shock of such a generous offer seemed to leave him momentarily speechless. The cabin crew, who had been watching the interaction unfold, looked at each other uncertainly. They had never seen anything like it before. First-class seats were typically reserved for the high-paying elite, and passengers didn't just offer them to others for free, especially not to strangers. The rules of air travel were clear, and this wasn't the usual protocol. But Karoline, without hesitation, interrupted him. "No, I insist. You've served this country. You've done more than I ever will. This is the least I can do." The veteran's eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and confusion. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. Karoline smiled warmly. "You don't have to say anything. Just accept it." After a brief pause, the veteran stood up, carefully gathering his belongings. The few passengers nearby watched, some with admiration, others unsure of what was happening. The man walked towards the first-class section of the plane, following Karoline's lead. The flight attendants, still stunned, quickly moved to adjust the seating arrangements, ensuring that the veteran had the comfort he deserved. As the man settled into the first-class seat, the cabin fell silent for a moment. Karoline returned to her seat in the coach section, her heart swelling with pride. She had no intention of seeking attention or making a political statement, this was just the right thing to do. Yet, as the plane continued on its course, the ripple effect of her simple act began to unfold. The flight continued, and the cabin returned to its usual hum. But what had just happened wasn't going to be forgotten. The seeds of what Karoline had done were planted, and soon, they began to grow. Passengers who had witnessed the exchange whispered amongst themselves, their phones out, capturing snippets of the moment. The news wasn't just about the politics of the moment, it was about the values that people admired: selflessness, respect, and gratitude for the sacrifices made by veterans. When the plane finally landed, Karoline disembarked as usual, but the reaction she received at the airport was anything but typical. A group of travelers, some of whom had been on the flight, approached her with admiration. One woman, in tears, thanked her for what she had done. "My father was a veteran. He would have loved that," she said, voice trembling with emotion. Karoline smiled warmly, offering only a few words of thanks in return. She wasn't in it for the praise, she was in it because it was the right thing to do. Within hours, the story began to spread across social media. Headlines soon popped up: Karoline Leavitt trades first-class seat for veteran, what happens next stuns everyone. The public's reaction was immediate and intense. Some hailed her as a true hero, someone who walked the talk, who didn't just make speeches about supporting the troops but lived those ideals in real life. Others, however, couldn't help but feel a little skeptical. Was this a calculated move? Was it a publicity stunt to increase her political capital? But Karoline's response to the media was unwavering. In an interview that evening, she calmly stated, "I didn't do this for attention. I did it because I believe in respecting those who have served our country. The spotlight shouldn't be on me, but on the sacrifices that so many veterans have made." The controversy only fueled the debate. Some saw it as an authentic gesture that demonstrated her genuine care for veterans. Others criticized it as a PR move, claiming that it was nothing more than a political stunt disguised as an act of charity. As the days passed, Karoline's act of kindness continued to stir conversations on social media, news networks, and talk shows. It wasn't just about a woman offering her seat to a man, it was about how the public perceived political figures and their ability to make a real difference. Was it a simple act of generosity or a calculated move to win hearts? The lines blurred, and the nation was divided. As the story of Karoline Leavitt's seat swap with a veteran continued to make headlines, the political world began to take notice. Journalists, pundits, and political analysts debated the significance of the gesture, dissecting it through the lens of her career and its potential impact on her public image. For some, it was a masterstroke. Karoline's actions painted her as a politician who was more than just rhetoric, a person who could connect with everyday citizens, a leader who understood the importance of honoring those who had sacrificed for the country. This resonated deeply with conservative voters, many of whom had long felt that the sacrifices of veterans were often overlooked by the elite. Karoline's bold, personal gesture struck a chord with them, and it didn't take long for her approval ratings to see a slight uptick, especially among older voters and military families. Yet, not everyone saw it in the same light. Critics began to scrutinize Karoline's decision more closely. Some claimed that it was a form of virtue signaling, an attempt to position herself as a compassionate politician, even if her actions didn't truly go beyond the surface level. Certain media outlets began questioning whether her generous move was truly selfless or whether it was a calculated attempt to gain favor among key voter groups. The veteran, whose name was later revealed to be Robert Shaw, spoke to reporters about the incident, and his response only deepened the complexity of the story. "I was just trying to get home like everyone else," Shaw said with a humble chuckle. "But what she did, it wasn't about politics. She just wanted to help, and that's what matters." His words added a layer of authenticity to the act, as if his reaction alone validated Karoline's gesture. However, as Karoline's story gained national traction, the focus shifted from her generosity to its potential political ramifications. Did her act reveal a deeper, more compassionate side of her, or was it just another calculated move in the game of politics? This sparked an ongoing debate in the public sphere: was Karoline Leavitt the real deal, or was she simply playing the part? Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Karoline's political team was grappling with how to handle the fallout. While many of her supporters rallied behind her, the media frenzy became difficult to control. Some staff members suggested that she lean into the gesture, using it as a symbol of her commitment to veterans. Others warned against overplaying it, fearing that it might come across as a stunt rather than a genuine act of goodwill. As the weeks passed, Karoline's political opponents began to seize on the controversy. Ads began circulating, questioning whether she had used the moment to further her career. "She's not just in it for the country. She's in it for the spotlight," one ad boldly claimed, with images of Karoline in the spotlight surrounded by flashing cameras. But Karoline, ever determined, stood firm. "I didn't make this decision to win votes," she told reporters at a rally. "I made it because we owe our veterans more than just words. We owe them our respect, and that's not something I take lightly." As the political storm over Karoline Leavitt's seat swap with Robert Shaw continued to brew, an unexpected twist took place that completely shifted the narrative. A few weeks after the flight incident, Karoline received a letter, a handwritten letter, from none other than the Department of Veterans Affairs. The letter was brief but deeply personal. It came with a certificate of recognition for her act of kindness, acknowledging her unwavering support for veterans. The letter stated that while many political figures spoke about honoring veterans, Karoline had taken action, one that went far beyond just words. The letter concluded with an invitation for Karoline to visit the VA in Washington, D.C. for a special ceremony, where she would be recognized for her commitment to veterans and their families. This official recognition sparked another wave of media attention, but this time, it was different. The narrative began to shift. The letter, and the subsequent recognition from the Department of Veterans Affairs, added credibility to her initial act of generosity. It wasn't just an isolated moment of goodwill, it was an acknowledgement from an official body that saw the value in what Karoline had done. This gave her gesture a new sense of legitimacy, both in the eyes of her supporters and the general public. The ceremony at the VA was a turning point. As Karoline stood on the stage, accepting the award in front of veterans, military families, and dignitaries, the applause was loud and genuine. The same media outlets that had previously questioned her motives now found themselves praising her for her commitment to serving those who had served the country. The political analysts who had once debated the authenticity of her actions now found themselves reluctantly admitting that Karoline had done something truly meaningful. The ceremony also marked the beginning of a new phase in her political career. She had gone from a rising star with strong ideals to a politician with tangible proof of her dedication to the issues that mattered most. The veterans community, which had often been overlooked in political discourse, had found a powerful ally in Karoline. Her act of kindness was no longer just a story, it was a symbol of how small actions could create a big impact. Yet, the controversy wasn't entirely gone. Some critics still claimed that her move had been politically motivated. But now, those voices were drowned out by the overwhelming support from veterans and their families. The questions about her sincerity became less important as the focus shifted to the lasting impact of her gesture on the veteran community. Karoline's approval ratings surged, particularly among military families and older voters. Her position in the political landscape grew stronger, and the once divisive act of giving up her first-class seat now stood as a powerful reminder of her values. In the end, it wasn't just about a seat on an airplane, it was about the kind of leader Karoline Leavitt wanted to be, someone who put others first, someone who took action rather than just speaking about change. Months after Karoline Leavitt's now iconic seat swap with Robert Shaw, the public and political landscape had irrevocably shifted. What had started as a seemingly small gesture, a simple act of generosity, had transformed into a defining moment of her political career, one that left a lasting legacy. Karoline continued to push forward with her legislative agenda, championing policies that prioritized veterans, healthcare reform, and support for rural communities. The momentum from her recognition at the Department of Veterans Affairs fueled her efforts, and her work was now increasingly focused on creating tangible change for the people who had shown her support in the wake of the seat swap. She co-sponsored bills aimed at expanding healthcare access for veterans and improving resources for their mental health, following through on the promise she had made during her public statements. The veteran community, once skeptical of politicians, had found in her a true advocate. Despite the political battles that inevitably followed, Karoline had solidified herself as a leader who made real commitments, not just hollow promises. Her reputation for integrity and for following through on her values strengthened her platform, and the media began to refer to her as one of the rising stars in Washington, a voice for the underrepresented and the forgotten. But it wasn't just the policy work that defined Karoline's legacy. Her ability to cut through the noise of political rhetoric and show a moment of personal vulnerability, whether it was in a public speech or on that fateful flight, had earned her a place in the hearts of many Americans. For all the cynicism that pervades modern politics, her gesture served as a reminder that humanity and kindness could still have a place in the public sphere. As time went on, Karoline's seat swap became a widely shared example of what leadership could look like in a divided world. Political science students studied it in classrooms. The story was recounted by pundits and reporters as an example of how a single act could inspire a movement and shift public opinion. A viral hashtag #LeavittForVeterans, was born, and Karoline's supporters used it to raise awareness for various veteran-related causes, organizing charity drives and volunteer efforts across the country. It wasn't just her political supporters who rallied behind her, it was ordinary citizens who appreciated what she had done for Robert Shaw. She became a symbol of the everyday person stepping up, no matter their position, to do what's right. Years later, when Karoline looked back on that flight, she was reminded that the story wasn't about her. It was about the thousands of veterans, the everyday people, and the small acts of kindness that, when combined, had the power to change a nation's heart. In her final speech about the incident, Karoline said, "I didn't do anything extraordinary. I simply tried to show respect for someone who had given so much." And if we all took a moment to think about how we can give back, whether it's a seat on a plane, or time in our communities, then we'd see a world that's a little more compassionate, a little more just. And with that, her story, once a controversial political moment, had become a timeless lesson, that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark the change we all need. The years that followed Karoline Leavitt's moment of generosity aboard that flight were filled with triumphs and challenges, but the story of the veteran seat swap never truly faded from the national consciousness. It remained a defining moment in her career, a symbol of a new kind of politics, one rooted in empathy in action. Karoline's rise in the political arena continued unabated. She became a senior figure in Congress, advocating for policies that bridged divides and focused on uniting Americans rather than dividing them. Her efforts led to groundbreaking legislation aimed at improving care for veterans, addressing homelessness among former soldiers, and securing more funding for military families. Her relationship with the veteran community deepened, and she frequently visited VA hospitals, sitting down with veterans and their families, listening to their struggles, and working to implement solutions in a tangible way. Her work was tireless, but she knew it would never be truly finished. There would always be more to do. Yet every step she took was underscored by the understanding that leadership wasn't just about creating laws, it was about listening and being responsive to the needs of those who needed help the most. But her influence spread beyond just the halls of government. Across the country, Karoline's story inspired a new generation of young politicians and activists. Her actions demonstrated that real leadership wasn't about gaining power, it was about using that power to elevate others, especially those whose voices had been silenced for too long. Her willingness to make personal sacrifices, whether it was giving up her seat or sacrificing political capital to fight for veterans, showed a level of integrity that resonated deeply in an era of hyperpartisan politics. It wasn't just in Washington where her influence was felt. Schools, community centers, and local organizations began to cite Karoline's story as an example of the power of selflessness. In speeches, students learned about her as a model for how one person's decision could impact an entire nation. "Be the change you want to see in the world" became the slogan of many veterans organizations that had been inspired by her actions, emphasizing that small acts of kindness, no matter how unnoticed at first, could be the catalyst for larger societal change. Even as Karoline's political career matured, she always carried the weight of that flight and the impact it had. It was, in her words, a reminder that leadership isn't always about grand speeches and bold proclamations, it's about doing what's right, even when no one is watching. And though the controversy had long since died down, the public remembered her for something far greater than any scandal or political debate. They remembered her as someone who believed in the good of people, someone who acted on that belief, and someone who inspired a generation to do the same. In her final term in office, after years of tireless service, Karoline Leavitt stood before a crowd at her retirement ceremony and said, "I don't know if I changed the world, but I know I tried to. And if that inspires even one person to be kinder, more generous, or more empathetic, then I've done what I set out to do." And with that, she passed the baton to the next generation of leaders, knowing that the legacy she had left would echo in the hearts of many for years to come.